Hey, Glenn Kaiser here.
I'm going to show you how I replaced a TSI 2.0 engine out of this 2012 Volkswagen Jetta GLI. Now the reason I had to do the engine swap was because of an engine failure. So basically I was unlucky and had one of the earlier versions of this TSI 2.0 engine, which is prone to a timing chain tensioner failure. Basically this timing chain tensioner holds tension on the chain, and if it fails, then the chain can slip and throw your timing off, and if that timing's off, the pistons and the valves can come in contact with one another and cause a lot of damage. So once the valves are bent, then the cylinder can't hold compression, so the engine won't run. And there might be a lot of other damage, so it's pretty expensive to repair. Instead, I decided to swap it with an engine that I found that had 49,000 miles on it. It was in good shape. Also came with the whole intake assembly and the manifold and the exhaust, the turbo, and some other components, which really made the swap much easier. So normally, when you remove the engine, normally they would remove it from the bottom by raising the vehicle up. And you do have to remove the engine and the transmission together as one unit. Instead, I removed the engine from the top using an engine hoist. And I did have to remove the engine mounts for clearance, but it wasn't too bad. I think it is possible to disconnect the engine from the transmission and leave the transmission in and then pull the engine, but there's a very tight clearance, and that engine has to come forward quite a bit away from that gearbox, and I do believe you have to remove a lot of components in order to get that clearance. So instead, felt it was probably more work than just removing the whole thing as a whole. So that's what I did. Now, this is a pretty involved job. It's probably 20 to 30 hours of labor, and then it does require a lot of automotive experience and special tools. And in this video, I have a list here that shows the top 10 things that need to be removed or disconnected in order to free the engine and the transmission so it'll come out. So hopefully that's helpful. Then once I got the engine out, I removed the transmission or gearbox, and I decided to replace the rear main seal because it's notorious for leaking, and while I have it exposed, might as well do that. So I did replace with an upgraded seal. It's an IBED seal, it's much better. And then also the clutch. I went ahead and replaced the flywheel and the clutch with a lightweight flywheel and two-stage clutch. So added torque capability, who knows, might need it. So I went ahead and replaced that. And then once I got that in, I put the old gearbox back on, and then put the engine and the gearbox back in. Now you do have to install new engine mount bolts because those are stretch bolts, and requires new bolts. And then once you get the engine in position, you mount it up, and then basically you put it all back together kind of in the reverse order of disassembly. And it is a lot easier going back in and coming out. Just make sure that you torque everything to the right specs, double check, triple check the connections, make sure you use new oil, coolant, new spark plugs, seals, gaskets, anything that needs to be replaced. And then once you have it together, it should start right up. Now the remainder of this video is really going to provide more detail of the disassembly process. I didn't provide any detail of the assembly because it's basically the reverse order. So if you're thinking about doing this project, it is pretty involved, but I wish you good luck, and I hope this video is helpful. Thank you. We will be taking off all the harnesses and labeling them. I've used these color-coded zip ties here for the ones that are a little more ambiguous where they go, so that when we put the new engine in, we'll know where those connectors go. And you can see here that I've put the same colored zip tie in that location on the engine to be replaced. I suggest using a pick tool to disconnect these sensors, because you definitely don't want to break or damage the sensor. Okay, at this point we got pretty much all the connectors taken off and labeled. And I'm going to pull this harness out. There's one connector yet at the bottom that I need to get out. Got to remove one of the radiator hoses to get that. So the next step is to drain the radiator. We also got the AC compressor disconnected and bungee corded to the front of the car, and that will just be reinstalled later. Didn't have to break any of the lines, so that's good. Got the fuel hose disconnected. Set that aside here. We'll also have to disconnect the radiator, some of the radiator hoses and the core hoses back here. That's the next step. Okay, at this point I'm getting ready to remove this engine. I've disconnected all of the connectors, all the hoses, the mounts underneath the turbo to the catalytic converter, so everything's disconnected. I am going to remove the engine mounts so I can get to that mount. So I'm going to end up putting a jack underneath the engine to support it while I remove the mounts, and that will allow the engine to clear and be removed from the top. Okay, I'm going to replace the rear main seal with an IABED upgraded seal, and I've cleaned the surface here around, took off the old seal, and so I'm ready to install the new seal. Okay, here is the IABED upgraded seal. I've put a bead of RTV around, and I've pressed in the seal, so it's all ready to go. Now, the important thing is to make sure that this seal, there's a little lip around here, it has to be pointing toward the engine. If it gets, as you install it, if it's facing this way, it'll leak. So I have a little tool that I'm going to use to run around the lip just to make sure it's pointing toward the engine. It's best to do a few practice runs, but I'm going to install it on the top and kind of push downward to kind of spread the seal, at least at the top. Just double checking, and it does look like the seal is pointing forward toward the engine. Just going to run this around just to make sure. It looks like it is, and now I can press it in. Line it up and press it in. And then just install the bolts. And torque the bolts down to 9 Newton meters each. Now we're going to install this new lightweight flywheel and performance clutch kit, stage 2. So it comes with all the bolts and a guide tool, of course the clutch and pressure plate. So everything's here. Let's get started. Okay, at this point I'm going to put the flywheel and clutch on. I've put this gasket on. Do not forget to put this metal gasket on before you go and put the flywheel on.